The hardest betrayals don't begin with a kiss. They begin with the moment someone looks you in the eyes, tells you everything is fine, and quietly starts building a second life where you no longer belong. By the time the truth finally reaches you, the damage has already been done. You spend weeks wondering whether you ignored the warning signs, or whether the person you loved simply became someone you never truly knew. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old and I live in Portland, Oregon. For almost 4 years, I believed I had found the man I was going to marry. His name was Ryan. We weren't the loud, dramatic couple everyone noticed when we walked into a room. We were the quiet couple people assumed would last forever. We shared grocery lists, weekend coffee dates, movie nights where neither of us actually watched the movie because we'd spend the entire time talking about work, family, or where we wanted to travel someday. We argued sometimes, sure. Usually about dishes, laundry, whose turn it was to take the trash out, nothing serious, nothing that ever made me question whether we were solid. When our apartment lease was coming to an end, we even started looking at small houses together. Ryan wanted a backyard, I wanted a kitchen with a big window. We laughed about how we'd eventually have 2 golden retrievers running around the yard while our future kids complained about homework. Everything felt normal, safe, real looking back now. That's probably why I ignored the first warning. It came in the form of a simple name, Daniel. Ryan mentioned him one evening while we were eating dinner. "Oh, by the way," he said casually, "Daniel transferred to my department." "Who's Daniel?" "You remember, my old college friend." I vaguely remembered hearing the name years earlier. Apparently they'd lost touch after graduation. Now they worked in the same office again. "That's nice," I smiled. "It'll probably make work less boring." Ryan laughed. "You have no idea, at first." That's exactly what it seemed like. Every few days he'd tell me another funny story. Daniel accidentally deleted an important spreadsheet. Daniel burned popcorn in the office microwave. Daniel convinced everyone to order terrible sushi from a new restaurant. Nothing unusual, just coworkers becoming friends. A few weeks later, Ryan started coming home later, not dramatically later. Maybe 45 minutes, sometimes an hour. He always had a reasonable explanation. We grabbed burgers after work. We watched the game. Traffic was awful. I believed him, why wouldn't I? Trust isn't something you think about when everything feels normal. It's just there. One Friday night I asked if he wanted to watch a movie. He smiled apologetically. I already told Daniel we'd grab a couple drinks. "No problem." He kissed my forehead before leaving. "I'll be home before midnight." He came home around 1:30, a little drunk, still smiling. Still acting like everything was perfectly fine. I didn't argue. People are allowed to have friends. I reminded myself of that over and over again, then something changed. Ryan started checking his phone during dinner, not once or twice. Constantly, his phone buzzed, he smiled, he replied immediately. Sometimes he'd actually turn the screen away from me without realizing he was doing it. Tiny things, almost invisible, until you notice them. One Sunday morning we were making pancakes together when his phone lit up on the counter. "Daniel." Ryan grabbed it faster than I'd ever seen him move. He looked almost nervous. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah, you looked startled," he laughed. "Work stuff on a Sunday morning, that didn't make much sense, but again, I let it go because relationships require trust, or at least I believed they did. The strange thing about losing someone's trust isn't that it happens all at once. It happens in tiny moments that don't seem important until you look back and realize they were all pointing in the same direction. For the next few weeks, Ryan's routine changed even more. He started leaving for work earlier than usual. He came home later. If I asked how his day went, I'd get the same short answers every time. Busy, long meetings. I'm exhausted. The man who used to tell me every funny thing that happened at work suddenly had nothing to say. One Thursday evening, I made his favorite dinner, homemade lasagna. I wanted us to have a quiet night together. As soon as he walked through the door, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and sighed. I completely forgot. Daniel invited a few people over to watch the game. I looked at him. "You already made plans." "I forgot to tell you." I forced a smile. "Okay, you don't mind, do you?" What was I supposed to say? If I said yes, I'd sound controlling. If I said no, I'd spend another evening alone. So I kissed him goodbye and watched him leave 20 minutes after he got home. That night, I sat on the couch eating dinner by myself. The apartment felt unusually quiet. It wasn't that he was spending time with a friend. It was how quickly our plans had become optional while his plans with Daniel seemed untouchable. A few days later, we met some friends for brunch. Ryan laughed more in those 2 hours than he had all week with me. I noticed he kept checking his phone under the table. Every few minutes, every vibration made him smile. When we got back to the car, I finally asked, "Is everything okay?" He looked confused. "What do you mean? You seem distracted lately." "I'm just busy, I know. But it feels like you're somewhere else even when we're together." He stared out the windshield for a second, then he laughed softly. "Emily, you're overthinking." Those 2 words stayed with me. "You're overthinking." Maybe I was. Maybe work really was stressful. Maybe I was being insecure. I convinced myself to stop paying attention, but once your instincts start whispering, they rarely stop. About 2 weeks later, Ryan announced he was going to Daniel's house again. This time, something inside me finally spoke up. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "How often do you guys hang out now?" He shrugged. "I don't know, 3 or 4 times a week, maybe." "That's a lot," he frowned. "He's my friend, I know, so what's the problem?" "There isn't one." He crossed his arms. "It sounds like there is." I took a deep breath. "I'm not asking you to stop seeing him. I'm just saying it feels like we barely spend time together anymore." For the first time in years, Ryan looked irritated with me. "You knew I wasn't going to stop having friends just because we're dating. I never asked you to. Then why are we having this conversation?" "Because I miss you." The room fell silent. A year earlier, he would have walked over, hugged me, and apologized. Instead, he grabbed his keys. "I'll be back later." The door closed. I stood there staring at it, not because he left. Because he didn't even try to understand why I was hurting. That was the night I realized the distance between us wasn't measured in miles. It was measured in conversations we no longer had. A few days later, something happened that I couldn't ignore. Ryan was in the shower. His phone lit up on the kitchen counter. I wasn't trying to snoop, I honestly wasn't. But the screen lit up long enough for me to read the notification. "Daniel, last night was fun. Same place next Friday." That message shouldn't have bothered me. Friends make plans. Normal people don't panic over text messages, but for some reason, my stomach dropped, not because of what it said, because of how protective Ryan had become about his phone. When he came out of the bathroom, I asked casually, "Looks like Daniel wants to hang out again." His face changed for just a second, a tiny flash of surprise. "You looked at my phone?" It lit up. "Oh." He picked it up immediately and slipped it into his pocket. That tiny movement said more than any explanation ever could. I didn't accuse him of anything, I didn't yell, I simply watched, and for the first time, I started wondering whether I was fighting for a relationship that only one of us was still protecting. People always say that if something is wrong, you should trust your instincts. What they don't tell you is how exhausting it is when your heart keeps trying to argue with them. For the next several days, I said nothing, I smiled, I went to work, I cooked dinner, I acted like everything was normal. But inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan was slowly drifting into a life where I no longer fit. The following Friday, he came home just long enough to change his clothes. "Going out?" I asked. "Yeah, Daniel's having a few people over." "A few people, that's what he said." He grabbed his jacket and kissed my forehead. "I won't be late," I smiled, but the second the door closed, I looked around our apartment. It hit me how often I was alone lately. The pictures on the wall, the couch we picked together. The coffee mugs from our trip to Seattle, everything reminded me of the future we'd planned, a future that suddenly felt uncertain. Around 10 that night, my phone buzzed. It was my friend Megan. "Hey, are you out tonight?" "No, Ryan's with friends." A few seconds later, she replied, "Weird, I think I just saw him downtown." My heart skipped. With Daniel, there was a long pause. Then another message. "I only saw him with one guy walking into a rooftop bar." Maybe it was Daniel, I couldn't tell. I tried to convince myself that was probably exactly what it was. Still, something about it bothered me, not enough to accuse him, just enough to keep me awake. Ryan didn't get home until nearly 3 in the morning. He smelled like alcohol. His shirt was wrinkled. He looked completely exhausted. "You okay?" I asked quietly. He nodded without making eye contact. "Just tired." He went straight to the bathroom. I heard the shower running for almost 20 minutes. That was unusual. Ryan normally showered in the morning. When he finally climbed into bed, he turned away from me. No goodnight, no hug, nothing. I stared at the ceiling until sunrise. The next afternoon, we decided to go grocery shopping together. It felt like maybe things were getting back to normal. We joked about buying too many snacks. We argued playfully over which cereal tasted better. For about 30 minutes, it felt like the old us. Then his phone rang. "Daniel." Ryan looked at the screen, declined the call. 2 seconds later, another call. He sighed. "I should take this." He stepped outside the store. I watched him through the glass doors. His expression changed completely. He looked worried. Not annoyed, not relaxed, worried. When he came back inside, I asked, "Everything okay?" "Yeah." "What did he need?" "Nothing important." That answer came too fast. Later that evening, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Ryan, I need you to be honest with me." "I am, no, really honest." He looked up from his laptop. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if something has changed between us." His shoulders dropped. "Emily, you barely talk to me. You hide your phone. You're always with Daniel. And every time I ask if something's wrong, you tell me I'm imagining it." He rubbed his face. "I don't know what you want me to say. I want the truth." Silence, long, painful silence. Finally, he said, "I've just been stressed." "About what?" "Work." "Then why won't you let me help?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up. "I'm going for a drive." I watched him grab his keys. Running away from the conversation isn't fixing anything. He stopped at the door. "I'm not running away. It feels like you are." For a moment, I honestly thought he was going to come back. Instead, he walked out. The apartment fell silent once again. An hour later, Megan called me. "Emily." "Yeah, I don't know if I should tell you this." My stomach tightened. "What happened?" "I was meeting my sister for dinner." "Okay." "I saw Ryan." My heart started racing. "Where?" "Outside Daniel's apartment building." I frowned. "I thought Daniel lived in the suburbs." "He does, so why would Ryan be downtown?" "I don't know." There was another pause, then Megan spoke very carefully. "And there was someone else standing with them." "Who?" I couldn't see clearly. They were talking. It looked tense. My hands began to shake. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation, but for the first time since we'd been together, I wasn't sure I believed that anymore, and deep down, I had the terrifying feeling that the truth was much bigger than I was prepared to hear. There's a strange moment before your life changes. Nothing dramatic happens. The world doesn't stop. Cars keep driving, people keep laughing. The sun still rises the next morning, but somewhere deep inside, you realize you're standing at the edge of a truth you can no longer avoid. The day after Megan called me, Ryan acted as if nothing had happened. He woke up early, made coffee, and even asked if I wanted pancakes. For a second, I almost convinced myself I'd been overreacting. Maybe I had let my anxiety get the best of me. Maybe there really was an innocent explanation for everything. Then I noticed his phone. It was face down on the kitchen counter. That had become a habit. Months ago, he'd leave it lying around without a second thought. Now it was always locked, always turned over, always within arm's reach. It wasn't the phone itself that hurt, it was what it represented. Trust had quietly disappeared from our relationship. That afternoon, Ryan told me he had to work late. "Big project?" I asked. "Yeah," he replied, barely looking up. "My boss wants everything finished before Monday. Will you be home for dinner?" "I don't think so. Don't wait for me." He kissed my cheek and walked out. Something in his voice felt rehearsed, like he'd already practiced that conversation in his head. I tried to ignore it. I really did. But around 7 that evening, Megan texted me. "Are you home?" "Yeah, why?" A photo appeared a few seconds later. My heart stopped. It was blurry, taken from across the street. But there was no mistaking Ryan's truck parked outside a modern apartment building downtown. Not the office, not anywhere near his workplace. I stared at the picture for nearly a minute. Maybe he had stopped there for work. Maybe he was meeting a client. Maybe. I kept making excuses because the alternative was too painful. Ryan came home just after 10. He looked tired. Or maybe guilty. I couldn't tell anymore. "Long day?" I asked. He nodded. "You have no idea." I wanted to tell him about the picture. I wanted to ask why his truck wasn't at work. Instead, I simply smiled because I wasn't interested in another excuse. I wanted the truth, and I knew he wasn't ready to give it. Over the next few days, I started paying attention instead of making excuses. Not spying, not following him, just watching. Every evening, he'd disappear into the bedroom to answer phone calls. If I walked in unexpectedly, the conversation ended immediately. If his phone buzzed during dinner, he'd pick it up without hesitation. Meanwhile, when I talked about my day, he barely seemed to hear me. One night, I stopped talking in the middle of a sentence. He didn't even notice, he just kept scrolling through his phone. That's when I realized something heartbreaking. I wasn't competing with another woman. I was competing for the attention of the man I already lived with. The following Saturday, we attended Ryan's cousin's birthday party. His entire family was there. Everyone kept asking us the same question. "So, when's the wedding?" Ryan smiled politely. "Soon." I forced a smile too, but inside, the word felt heavier than ever. His mother pulled me aside while Ryan was talking to his cousins. "Emily," she said softly, "you seem quieter than usual." "I'm just tired." She gave me a knowing look. Relationships go through rough patches. I smiled. I know, she squeezed my hand, just don't stop talking to each other. If only she knew, talking wasn't our problem anymore. The problem was that only one of us seemed interested in having the conversation. That night, after we got home, Ryan fell asleep on the couch. His phone slipped from his hand onto the floor. The screen lit up, one notification from Daniel. Did you tell her anything? My chest tightened. I wasn't trying to invade his privacy. I hadn't picked up the phone. I had simply seen the notification light up from where I was standing. 3 seconds later, the notification disappeared. Ryan had activated a feature that hid message previews. Almost as if he expected me to see them, I stood there frozen. Did you tell her anything? Anything about what? That single sentence echoed through my mind for the rest of the night. For the first time, I wasn't just worried that Ryan was hiding something. I was terrified that whatever he was hiding had already changed our relationship forever. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, one sentence kept replaying in my head. Did you tell her anything? It wasn't just the message. It was everything that had happened over the past few months. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the growing distance, the excuses that never quite made sense. For weeks, I'd been trying to convince myself that I was being paranoid. Now, that lie was becoming harder to believe. The next morning, Ryan acted like nothing had happened. He made coffee, turned on the TV, asked if I wanted breakfast. I looked at him across the kitchen island and wondered how someone could seem so familiar and yet feel like a complete stranger. Everything okay? He asked. I forced a smile. Yeah, but it wasn't, not even close. That afternoon, I met Megan for lunch. The moment I sat down, she looked at my face and sighed. You didn't sleep? I shook my head. No, she stirred her coffee for a moment before speaking. Emily, can I ask you something? Sure. If your sister came to you with this exact story, what would you tell her? The question caught me off guard. I don't know. I think you do. I stared out the cafe window. If she told me her boyfriend suddenly became distant, started hiding his phone, spent more time with another person than with her, and kept making excuses, I stopped talking. Megan nodded gently. What would you say? I'd tell her something was wrong. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. So why won't you tell yourself the same thing? I didn't have an answer. Because love has a strange way of making obvious things feel impossible to accept. That evening, Ryan told me he was going for a run. Normally, he'd be gone for 45 minutes, an hour later. Nothing, 90 minutes, still nothing. When he finally came home, he wasn't even sweating. You were gone a while. I stopped to talk to Daniel. My heart sank. You just happened to run into him? Yeah, what are the odds? He shrugged. I don't know. It felt like another rehearsed answer. A few days later, everything changed. I was working from home when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Ryan's name. I answered immediately. Hey, silence. Then I heard muffled voices. Ryan hadn't called me intentionally. It sounded like the phone had dialed me from his pocket. I was about to hang up, then I heard Daniel's voice. She still doesn't know, Ryan answered quietly. No, how long are you going to keep this up? I said I'm handling it. You need to decide. I know. The call ended. I sat frozen at my desk. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what I supposedly didn't know, but one thing became painfully clear. There was a conversation happening about me. Without me, Ryan came home around 6. He smiled the moment he walked through the door. How was your day? I looked him straight in the eyes. It was interesting, he paused. What do you mean? I got a phone call. His smile disappeared for the first time in months. I watched genuine panic flash across his face. What phone call? From you? I didn't call you. I know, you called me by accident. His expression turned pale. I continued quietly. I heard enough to know that you're hiding something. The room fell completely silent. Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it again. For nearly a full minute, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, Emily, I can explain. My heart broke before he even said another word. Because the moment someone says, I can explain, you already know there's something that needs explaining, and whatever came next, I wasn't sure our relationship would survive it. Ryan stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the floor. For the first time since all of this had started, he didn't reach for an excuse. He didn't blame work. He didn't tell me I was overthinking. He just looked, defeated. I folded my arms, trying to stop my hands from shaking. Then explain. He took a long breath. Nothing physical has happened. I let out a bitter laugh. I didn't ask if something physical happened. His eyes filled with regret. I asked what you're hiding. He slowly sat down on the edge of the couch, rubbing his hands together. I've been afraid to tell you because I knew how it would sound. Try me. For a long moment he said nothing, then he finally spoke. A few months ago, Daniel admitted he had feelings for someone. I frowned. So, Ryan swallowed hard, that person was you. The room went completely silent. I blinked, convinced I'd heard him wrong. What? He told me he thought you were kind. Funny, that if we ever broke up, he wanted to ask you out. I stared at him in disbelief. And you never told me. I thought if I ignored it, it would go away. I felt my chest tight. So instead of telling me, you kept spending more time with him? Ryan nodded slowly. He kept saying he respected our relationship. He promised he would never act on it. I believed him. I stood up. You believed the man who admitted he wanted your girlfriend? I know how stupid that sounds now. No, I interrupted. It sounds cruel. He looked up at me, confused. Cruel? You let me sit across from him at dinners. You invited him into our lives. You watched me treat him like a friend, while knowing he was hoping our relationship would fail. Ryan covered his face with both hands. I know, no, you don't. Tears were running down my face now. You took away my ability to protect myself because you decided I didn't deserve the truth. He whispered. I was trying to avoid drama. I shook my head. You didn't avoid it, you postponed it, and now it's worse. The apartment fell silent. For the first time in our relationship, I didn't recognize the man sitting in front of me. Not because he'd cheated, but because he'd hidden something so important while expecting me to trust him blindly. After several minutes, he quietly asked, "What happens now?" I looked toward the window. The sun was beginning to set. A few months earlier, I would have answered without hesitation. We work through it now. I honestly didn't know. I need time. He nodded. I understand. That night, I packed a small overnight bag. As I walked toward the front door, Ryan's voice stopped me. Emily, I turned around. I'm sorry. I looked at him for a long moment. I believe that you're sorry. A tear rolled down my cheek. I just don't know if being sorry is enough anymore. I walked out of the apartment. For the first time in 4 years, I had no idea whether I was walking away for one night or forever. My older sister, Lauren, opened the door before I even knocked. The second she saw my face, she wrapped her arms around me. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't pressure me to talk. She simply held me while I cried. Sometimes that's all a broken heart needs. The next morning, I woke up on her couch after barely sleeping. My phone was full of notifications. 7 missed calls from Ryan, 3 text messages. Ryan, please talk to me. Ryan, I know you're hurting. Ryan, I'll answer anything. I just don't want to lose you. I stared at the screen but couldn't bring myself to reply. I wasn't ready, not because I wanted to punish him, because I still didn't know what I believed anymore. Lauren poured 2 cups of coffee and sat beside me. So, I nodded. So, she smiled sadly. Start wherever you want. For nearly an hour I told her everything, the late nights, the distance. The lies, the hidden conversations, Daniel, every detail. She listened without interrupting. When I finally finished, she asked one simple question. Do you trust him? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. That silence answered for me. Later that afternoon, Ryan sent another message. Can we meet public place just to talk? After staring at it for almost an hour, I agreed. We met at a quiet coffee shop halfway across town. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, unshaven, like he hadn't slept either. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, he slid his phone across the table. I changed the password back. I looked at him. You can look through anything. I have nothing else to hide. I gently pushed the phone back toward him. I don't want to build a relationship where I have to check your phone. His eyes filled with tears. I know. I just don't know how else to prove I'm telling the truth. I took a deep breath. This isn't about your phone anymore. It's about your choices. He nodded slowly. I know you let someone stay in our lives after he admitted he wanted me. You lied about where you were. You made me question my own instincts. And every time I tried to talk about it, you made me feel like I was imagining things. Ryan wiped his eyes. I was ashamed. I kept thinking I could fix it before you ever found out. I looked at him for a long moment. Secrets don't fix relationships. They destroy them. Before we left, Ryan told me one more thing. I blocked Daniel. I frowned. What? I told him we're done. I told him I chose my relationship. I should have done it months ago. I wanted to feel relieved. Part of me did, but another part kept asking the same question. Why did it take almost losing me? That evening, I drove back to the apartment to pick up more clothes. Ryan wasn't home. The place felt strangely empty. As I packed a suitcase, I noticed a small notebook sitting on the bookshelf. It was one we'd used while house hunting. Inside were lists of neighborhoods, mortgage estimates, baby names we'd jokingly written down, vacation plans, dreams we'd built together. I sat on the floor and cried harder than I had in days. Because the hardest part wasn't losing the future we'd planned, it was realizing that I no longer knew if I could trust the person I'd planned it with. As I closed the notebook, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "You deserve to know the whole truth. Ryan isn't telling you everything." A second message appeared before I could react. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. There was no name, no explanation, just those two messages, and somehow, I knew my nightmare wasn't over yet. For nearly 5 minutes, I just stared at the message. "You deserve to know the whole truth." My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped my phone. I read it again and again. Then I typed a reply. "Who is this?" A few seconds passed, then the screen lit up. "Someone who doesn't think you should spend another day being lied to." A chill ran down my spine. I looked around the apartment, suddenly feeling like someone was watching me. I grabbed my suitcase, locked the door behind me, and hurried to my car. Only after I had driven several blocks away did I reply again. "What truth?" This time the answer took almost 10 minutes. "Meet me tomorrow, 2:00 p.m. Riverfront Cafe. Come alone." No name. No explanation, just an address. That night I barely slept. Part of me wanted to ignore the message completely. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone was trying to create more problems between Ryan and me, but another part of me couldn't stop thinking about it. What if there really was more? The next morning, Ryan called again. I answered this time. "Hey," his voice sounded cautious. "How are you?" "I've been better. I understand." There was a long silence. Finally, he said, "I've been thinking about everything. So have I. I know I failed you." "You did. I'm not asking you to forgive me today. I'm asking for a chance to earn your trust back." I closed my eyes. "I don't know if I can promise that." "I know." Before hanging up, he added quietly, "I love you, Emily." For the first time in 4 years, I couldn't bring myself to say it back. The next afternoon, I arrived at Riverfront Cafe 15 minutes early. I chose a table near the window where I could see the entrance. At exactly 2 o'clock, a woman walked in. She looked to be around my age. She scanned the room until our eyes met. "Emily," I nodded. She sat across from me. "My name is Claire. I used to work with Ryan and Daniel." My stomach tightened. She took a deep breath. "I've been debating whether I should contact you." "Why?" "Because I know what it's like to be the last person to find out something." I leaned forward. "What are you talking about?" Claire looked genuinely uncomfortable. "For months, people at the office noticed Ryan and Daniel arguing." "About what?" "You." My heart skipped. "They argued because Daniel kept saying your relationship wouldn't last." I frowned. "And Ryan, he defended you every single time." That wasn't what I expected. Claire continued, "But after a while, Ryan stopped talking about you." "What do you mean?" "He stopped mentioning wedding plans. He stopped talking about buying a house. When people asked about you, he'd just change the subject." A heavy silence settled between us. "Did he cheat on me?" Claire shook her head immediately. "Not that I ever saw." "Then why message me?" She hesitated. "Because Ryan wasn't the only one keeping secrets." I felt my heart pounding again. "What secret?" Claire looked down at her coffee before meeting my eyes. "The night Daniel admitted he had feelings for you, he wasn't telling the truth." I stared at her. "What do you mean, he never had feelings for you?" The words hit me like a freight train. "What?" Claire nodded slowly. "He made the whole story up." I could barely breathe. "Why would he do that?" Claire's expression turned grim. "Because he wanted Ryan to start doubting the relationship. He knew the more insecure Ryan became, the easier it would be to drive a wedge between the two of you." I sat frozen. Every conversation, every late night, every argument, everything suddenly looked different, but one question still echoed in my mind. "If that's true, then why didn't Ryan tell me any of this?" Claire sighed. "I don't know, but whatever happened between those two, it became much bigger than anyone at work understood." I left the cafe more confused than when I had arrived. One thing was certain. I finally had another piece of the puzzle, but I still didn't have the whole picture, and until I did, I couldn't decide whether my relationship had been destroyed by lies or by fear. I sat in my car outside the cafe for almost 20 minutes. The engine was off. The windows were fogging up, but I couldn't bring myself to drive away. Claire's words kept replaying in my head. Daniel made the whole story up. If that was true, then why had Ryan become so distant? Why had he lied about where he was? Why had he hidden everything instead of simply telling me what was happening? None of it made sense, and I wasn't willing to make another decision based on half the truth. This time, I wanted the whole story. That evening I texted Ryan, "We need to talk, no more secrets, no more excuses." His reply came almost instantly. Whenever you're ready, I told him to meet me at our apartment in an hour. When I arrived, Ryan was already there. He was sitting on the couch exactly where I'd left him a few days earlier. He stood up the moment I walked in. I've been waiting. I didn't sit down. I met someone today. His face tightened. Who? Claire. He looked genuinely surprised. Claire from work? Yes. The color drained from his face. What did she tell you? I looked him straight in the eyes. She told me Daniel never had feelings for me. Ryan closed his eyes. For several seconds, he said nothing, then he whispered, she's right. I felt my stomach drop. So, you knew? He nodded slowly. Not at first. What do you mean? He took a long breath. A few weeks after Daniel told me he liked you, I found out he'd been lying. I stared at him in disbelief. You found out? Yes, and you still never told me. He looked ashamed. I was embarrassed. No, I interrupted. You were dishonest. He lowered his head. I know. I folded my arms. So tell me everything, for the first time since this nightmare began. Ryan didn't hide behind short answers. He told me that Daniel had become obsessed with proving he could control people. He enjoyed creating conflict. He'd spread rumors at work before. He manipulated friendships. He thrived on drama. When Ryan finally realized the truth, he confronted Daniel. The argument became so intense that coworkers had to separate them. After that, Ryan stopped trusting him, but instead of telling me everything, he convinced himself he could quietly end the friendship and spare me the pain. Instead, his silence created even more pain. When he finished talking, the apartment was completely quiet. I looked around the room. Every corner held a memory, our first Christmas together, birthday celebrations, movie nights. The tiny scratches on the dining table we'd laughed about after trying to build it ourselves. This place had been our home, but trust wasn't built with memories, it was built with honesty. And honesty had been missing for a long time. Ryan finally spoke. I know I can't erase what happened. You can't. I know I don't deserve another chance. I didn't answer. Because I honestly didn't know if he did. He took one step closer. I'm willing to spend however long it takes earning your trust again. I'll go to counseling. I'll answer every question. I'll do whatever it takes. A tear rolled down my cheek. I believed he meant every word, but believing someone is sincere and trusting them again are two very different things. I looked at him for a long moment before quietly saying, I need more than promises. I need time, he nodded. I'll wait. As I picked up my bag and walked toward the door, he didn't try to stop me. He simply said, I love you. This time, I paused. Without turning around, I whispered, I still love you too, and that's what makes this so hard. I walked out of the apartment once again. For the first time, it wasn't anger I felt. It was uncertainty. I still didn't know whether our story was coming to an end, or whether this was the painful beginning of a second chance. Some people think relationships end the moment trust is broken. I've learned that's not always true. Sometimes they end months later. When two people finally realize they're no longer fighting the same battle. For the next 6 weeks, Ryan and I barely spoke. There were no late-night phone calls. No emotional messages begging me to come home, just short, respectful texts. I hope you're doing okay. Take all the time you need. I'm here if you want to talk. That was different from the Ryan I'd seen over the previous months. For the first time, he wasn't trying to convince me. He was simply giving me space. During those weeks, I started therapy. At first, I thought therapy would help me decide whether to stay with Ryan. Instead, it helped me understand something about myself. For months, I'd been ignoring my own instincts because I was afraid of what they might mean. Every time something felt wrong, I found a way to explain it away, not because I was weak, because I loved him. Love can make you patient, but if you're not careful, it can also make you silent. And silence has a way of protecting the wrong person. About 2 months after I moved out, Ryan asked if we could meet one last time, not to pressure me, not to convince me, just to talk. We met at the same small coffee shop where we'd had our first date 4 years earlier. It felt strangely appropriate. He looked healthier than the last time I'd seen him, calmer, more honest. He smiled gently. Thank you for coming, I nodded. We talked for nearly 2 hours, not about Daniel, not about lies, not about blame. We talked about us, the people we'd become. The mistakes we'd made, the future we'd once imagined. Then Ryan looked at me and said something I never expected. If your answer is no, I'll accept it. I love you enough to stop asking you to carry the weight of my mistakes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I reached across the table and held his hand. Ryan, I forgive you. His eyes filled with tears, but forgiveness doesn't automatically rebuild trust, he nodded slowly. I know, I've spent weeks asking myself whether I could marry someone after everything that's happened, and I took a deep breath. My answer is, not right now. His shoulders dropped, but he didn't argue. I understand, I continued. That doesn't mean I don't love you. It means we have to rebuild what we lost before we make promises about forever. For the first time in months, he smiled, not because everything was fixed, but because for the first time we were being completely honest with each other. We didn't move back in together. We didn't set a wedding date. We started over, slowly. We went to counseling. We rebuilt our communication. We learned that trust isn't restored through grand gestures. It's rebuilt through hundreds of small, consistent actions, one honest conversation at a time. Almost a year later, Ryan proposed again. This time I didn't say yes immediately. I laughed through my tears and said, "Ask me again after we finish dinner." He laughed too. We finished our meal. We talked, we smiled, and when he asked again, I said yes, not because our relationship was perfect, but because we had finally learned that love isn't about never making mistakes. It's about having the courage to face them honestly, before they become impossible to repair. Today, we've been married for 3 years. People often ask us what the secret to a strong marriage is. I always give them the same answer. It's not about finding someone who never hurts you. It's about finding someone who takes responsibility when they do, and who proves, through actions rather than promises, that they are worthy of your trust again. Looking back, Daniel didn't destroy our relationship. His lies exposed the cracks that were already there. The real test wasn't whether someone tried to come between us, it was whether we were willing to rebuild what had been broken, and in the end, we chose each other every single day.
Before we end today's story, I want to hear your thoughts. If you were in Emily place, would you have forgiven Ryan and given the relationship and second chance, or would you have walked away for good? Let me know your opinion in the comments. I read as many of them as I can. If you enjoyed the story and wanted to hear more emotional related stories like this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notification bell so never miss a new upload. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next story.